Hello, my name is Randy Serafin, and this is my opposition constructive on why the UN should not require countries to uniformly enact substantial criminal justice reform in one or more of the following: forensic science, policing, and sentencing. Before I begin, I'd like to wish my opponent Luke Moon good luck in the debate. My time starts now. The UN is an organization that was created after the horrors of World War II with multiple goals outlined in its charter. According to the charter, to maintain international peace and security, to develop friendly relations among nations, to achieve international cooperation in solving international problems of an economic, social, cultural, or humanitarian character, and in promoting and encouraging respect for human rights and for fundamental freedoms for all without distinction as to race, sex, language, or religion, and to be a center for harmonizing the actions of nations in the attainment of these common ends. End quote. This is most of the first article of the first charter of the United Nations. The second article, however, states nothing contained in the present charter shall authorize the United Nations to intervene in matters which are essentially within the domestic jurisdiction of any state. The issue with the UN making a resolution to require countries to reform their own forensic science, policing, and sentencing policies that this oversteps their boundaries regarding domestic jurisdiction. A country's own police force should not be subject to scrutiny by the UN and the International Criminal Court unless it has committed war crimes, crimes against humanity, aggression, genocide, and of course, human rights violations. This brings me to my next point. The UN has been largely ineffective in the past 18 years at prosecuting offenders of the crimes I listed before. The UN states that the International Criminal Court has convicted 4 people in the past 18 years. There are multiple examples of outrageous war crimes going unprosecuted, with one example being the conscription of child soldiers in Sierra Leone during their recent civil war. If even war crimes have been ignored by the court, then how can we expect the court to prosecute crimes against humanity and human rights violations? The proposition brought up a report of the use of torture on protesters in Hong Kong. This sounds partially similar to what happened at the Tiananmen Square massacre of 1989, in which multiple sources and eyewitnesses say that 241 people were killed by the Chinese army and police. The UN did not do anything to hold the Chinese government accountable, and this is a bad precedent on how they will prosecute other offenders of human rights. I would now like to address the proposition's video as there are a few problems with it. My first problem with their video is they provided no citations to fact check their multiple uses of sources in the citation section. My next problem is that the proposition did not talk about what the country should do to reform. The proposition made a point to bring attention to the word uniformly in their opening. The proposition said uniformly meant, quote, consistent in conduct or opinion, unquote. Without giving an example of a reform the UN should require countries to do, it deflates their entire argument, as without an example a huge problem arises. The countries of the UN vary widely in wealth, government type, population, and almost every aspect. Some other factors that are very important to this debate are crime rates, incarceration rates, and police corruption rates. How possibly could a UN resolution address all these differences? This is also a reason that a country's police force is its own domestic jurisdiction, as I stated earlier. A country knows its problems best, so it should be up to the country to fix it in its own way. And if that happens, then it won't be a uniform country spanning police reform, making the resolution fall apart. My next problem is with another one of the proposition statements. The proposition stated, quote, by approaching cases that are borderline breaking human rights, the UN is able to enact substantial criminal justice reform, end quote. The problem with this statement is that the resolution is not about the UN enacting criminal justice reform, it's about the UN forcing countries to enact criminal justice reform. Lastly, if the UN only looks at certain cases, this is once again not a uniform solution to the criminal justice reform problem that we so heavily see nowadays. In conclusion, the UN is overstepping its boundaries and forcing countries to reform their police because of domestic jurisdiction. And despite the proposition's claims that the UN should prosecute offenders of human rights in certain cases, the International Criminal Court has only prosecuted 4 people for extremely serious crimes and ignored other grave war crimes, showing it's probably not going to prosecute smaller offenses. Lastly, uniformly requiring countries to pass criminal reform would be very hard, being how the proposition provided no example or means of a criminal reform. For these reasons, Judge, you should side with the opposition as the evidence shows the UN would be inept at handling the situation. That is all. Thank you.